Welcome to another Falls Creek Peaks Challenge training video. We're well into the program now. We've got through 3 weeks of training and we should be into our first recovery week this week leading into Christmas. I've seen some great sessions popping up in Training Peaks from my athletes. The first base phase was all about getting a routine going, focusing on some strength efforts and focusing on your aerobic capacity. The midweek sessions were all about focusing on that upper zone 2 area, and then on the weekends we're hopefully getting out to a hill and being able to do some strength efforts. I've seen some great efforts popping up from my athletes and they look exactly like what I want them to, and I hope yours are looking similar. Now we're into the recovery week. This week's the week where hopefully you've backed the volume off for the weekend. Hopefully your legs are going to be freshened right up, and we've got a 20-minute test plan just to see whether your FTP or that sustainable pace has changed from this first week block. A lot of people probably came into it without doing a lot of regular training, and we see some big increases in those first 4 weeks. So we retest that just so you can reset your baseline level for FTP. Now moving on to the next block, we're looking at a build phase, and the build phase is starting to get specific to what the event is all about, and it is muscular endurance where you've got lots of long climbing efforts over the duration of the event. So what we do is start off with an effort up a hill that is achievable. So we aim for, hopefully in the first week, 20 to 40 minutes total of climbing time. Now you need to be smart about this. In Melbourne we're lucky enough to have a hill that's 20 minutes long. If you aren't in a place that's got a 20-minute climb, then you need to adapt the session. So that might be, if it's a 10-minute climb and you've got to do 40 minutes total, you'll do 4 by 10-minute repeats. Whereas if you've got a 20-minute climb, you'll try and get through 2 by 20-minute repeats for a 40 minutes total. But the idea behind it is to, as the weeks progress, is to try and do a little bit more total climbing time. And the trick is to try and minimize the amount of rest between those climbs as well. Don't get to the top of the climb and have a coffee. Save that to the end. We want to accumulate some fatigue as the efforts go on. Now during the week in the build phase, we've also got some efforts that are targeted heart rate ones to really try and get you to focus on your highest sustainable climbing pace without tipping you over the edge. So the way I do it is set it up where it's heart rate based, and if you know what your threshold heart rate is, hopefully, you aim for about 10 beats or so below that. And in that way, you're then not going over that FTP, and your body should be steady state, you're not accumulating lactate and things like that. And the first effort of those should feel pretty easy or moderate, I suppose. And then from there, as the efforts go on, as you do more of them, you're not huffing and puffing, but the legs start to accumulate fatigue. And that's what we're trying to induce. So then later on in this build phase, we then go into some efforts where the first block of efforts are some ones where you go over FTP and then drop back below it again. And I think I've got some 30-30 type efforts in there. The purpose of them is to try and actually accumulate some fatigue in the legs, so that when you get into that second steady effort, it's going to feel like you've already done a fair bit of work, and it's going to be pretty hard to try and sustain. So the purpose of that is what I'd call a pre-fatigue set into a steady effort, because when you get to the top of Hotham and you're already getting a bit tired, at least you can draw back on this type of session and think, okay, I've done this before, I've had to dig deep in some earlier efforts, just getting over some steep little pinches. And now I've got to settle into a steady effort, and I think that works pretty well for training the brain and the legs to be able to cope with that. Now is also the time to start thinking about, on these long rides on the weekends, the focus is to minimize stopping time. If you're an athlete that goes out and loves a coffee shop, and there's more coffee shop time than there is ride time, it's not going to let the ride accumulate the fatigue as it goes on. So try and think about, if you've got a 3 or a 4 hour ride, try and do it non-stop if you can, with minimal stopping. Stop, fill your bidons up with water, but try and save that coffee shop stop for the end of the ride where you actually have earned it. Now as these training rides start to get longer, it's also time to think about nutrition. For the 2 hour rides or so, most people can get away with with minimal food consumption during the ride, and even what you eat beforehand, so a small breakfast. But as the rides get longer and harder, you need to start refueling the body. And the best way to think about that is to think about the way you're going to do it on the day of the event. And there's a few check boxes you need to think about for that. The first one is what you're going to eat. And I think the first thing to think about is getting your hands on the nutrition that is actually supplied by Bicycle Network for the event, which is Winner's Nutrition. That's available at the feed stations around the course. You can get them luckily at Coles and Woolies. I'd suggest getting your hands on those and just getting accustomed to it and making sure that your stomach can tolerate their product, I suppose. There's a range of products available. There's some bars, there's some chews, and there's also some gels. And look, on event day, I like to keep things pretty simple, and for myself, I'd probably just run on a combination of those three. The one thing I like to use in training is actually pretty simple, and it's nice and cheap. I just go grab a fruitcake from the supermarket, and I chop it up into squares, and I wrap it up in foil, and I carry that with me. That's got everything you need to fuel during a ride. It's cheap, it's sustainable during the ride, it has lots of carbs, it has lots of fructose in it, which is absorbed very quickly by the stomach, and it also keeps your satiety satisfied, where you're not hungry just eating gels and things like that. You're actually eating a solid piece of food. That complemented with whatever sports drink you like, whether it be just water in one bidon and some sports drink in another bidon, I'd start to now get in the routine of making sure that you're practicing your race day nutrition. And in some later videos, I'll go over the specifics of how much I think you need. But for now, a very basic approach to take is to have 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass each hour, in the range hopefully of somewhere between 50, somewhere up to like 90 grams per hour. The basic sports nutrition guidelines are about 60. That's perfectly fine for most people, and that's typically 1 gel and 1 bar, for example, will get you through 60 minutes of exercise. I'd usually get that in the form of a sports drink in a bottle, so I might have, let's say, half a bottle to a bottle of sports drink per hour, depending upon the weather. And then 1 food item, whether it's a bar, whether it's a gel, or whether it's a piece of fruitcake. That usually adds up to what I need. That is very important to learn, how much you can actually consume during your rides without causing GI distress and without getting to the end of a 4-hour ride where you feel starving and you're starting to get a bit lightheaded and whatnot. You want to avoid that food bonk, because that can be very detrimental to the later days of training. So I guess the next thing to bring up at this point in time is the next upcoming training blocks run over the Christmas and New Year period. Look, this can be a positive and it can be a negative. A lot of the time people have time off work through this period, so you might be able to ride more, and I'd suggest if you've got the time, try and sneak in a few extra hours here and there so you get a bit more training volume happening. It might give you the chance to get out to your closest hill maybe twice in the week instead of just once on the weekend. The other problem with this festive season can be family commitments and going away, and maybe you're not taking your bike with you when you go away. I'd suggest don't stress too much. It's only a small block and we've still got a long way to go before we get to March. But do what you can. If you haven't got your bike with you when you go away, try and find a bike at a gym or a friend's bike and just do something, whether it's on the ergo, whether it's out on the road. But doing some form of cardiovascular exercise stops you from going backwards. So try and even just go for a walk or a brisk jog. Just watch running too much if you're not used to doing it, because it can cause injury. But a brisk walk, swimming, anything is great. Just try to get that heart rate up and do what you can. Around Christmas itself, where you've got lots of family stuff on, try and do what you can as well. If you can sneak out for a ride, make sure you earn that Christmas lunch. This time of year is hard to abstain from things like alcohol and lots of yummy, tasty food. If you're trying to lose weight leading up to Peak Challenge, look, don't stress. Let yourself indulge a little bit for a couple of days and then get back onto track again. But look, it really won't hurt you in the long run. Just get back on track a couple of days afterwards and then try and eat super healthy and try and target that race weight or event weight that you want to try and hit. And look, now is the time to be able to lose a little bit of weight leading up to the event. You don't want to be cramming it in the last week or so, because when there's big training sessions coming up then and the critical ones, you want to make sure you're refueling well. I think that's about all I want to cover in this video. We're going to have another Facebook Live video coming up next week, where I will cover some of the hot topics I've been getting in from some emails and some comments on the YouTube channel. But everyone seems to be doing a pretty good job so far. All the athletes that I have personal contact with are right on track. They're well ahead of track, to be honest. They're climbing well. They're happy with how they're going. The rest weeks are giving them a chance to recover, and then they're always super surprised how they bounce back that next week after the legs have dealt with a little bit of accumulated fatigue, and then they do some hard efforts again, and it's been good to see. So I hope you have a good festive season for the next couple of weeks leading through to the new year. Okay, I think that's about it, and I will chat to you next video.